All right, I'm still working away inside lightreflection.ai, found inside the 22 transparency folder. In this exercise, we're going to recreate this reflection effect. And we're going to do so, if you're working along with me, by going to the layers panel and turning off the current reflection layer. Because as I say, we're going to remake it. And then I want you to grab the bulb and lines layer right there, and I want you to drag it onto the little page icon at the bottom of the layers panel and release in order to create a copy of that layer. Then I'm going to move it down below bulb and lines, and I'm going to double click on it so that we can give it a more meaningful name like Reflection 2, because here we are recreating the darn thing. And I'm going to change the color to brown, just so that we have a color that's easily recognizable on screen. I'll click OK in order to create that new item. Now currently the Reflection 2 objects are directly behind the bulb and line objects. We need to flip them. And we're going to do that by clicking in the upper right-hand corner on that little black wedge, and that'll select all the objects on that layer. And then I'm going to grab my Reflect tool, which I can get from the Rotate tool flyout menu, of course, or you can press the O key. And then I'm going to Alt-click, not directly on that baseline, but just a couple of screen pixels down at this location in order to bring up the Reflect dialog box. Now, for you, the axis is probably set to vertical if you've been working along with me. Go ahead and click on horizontal instead, so you're flipping across a horizontal axis in order to flip all the elements vertically, of course. If you want to preview the effect, turn on the preview checkbox, and then don't click copy because we already created some copies of these objects. I just copied the entire layer. We just need to click OK. And that creates the effects that you see on screen. Now, if I want to nudge these guys a little closer together, I might press the up arrow key a few times because I want the reflection to be almost exactly right under the actual objects, just a little bit of distance between them in order to simulate something going on, something in the nature of a slight layer of glass. All right, having done that, we now need to go ahead and assign an opacity mask to this layer. But if I go up to the transparency panel, and this is how you create an opacity mask, but it is one of those things where if you apply it just slightly wrong, you get a totally different effect than you think you will. So I want to see if I can help you anticipate that. If you go up to the transparency panel and click in the upper right-hand corner on that flyout menu icon and choose opacity mask, this is how you make one all the time. But if you do it in this case, then because the individual objects inside this layer are selected, you're going to see this little bit of text right here inside of your opacity mask thumbnail, which indicates that somehow the top item inside the layer, which is the text, has been used as a mask for the other items. And that's not what we want at all. We want to see an altogether empty opacity mask to start with. So go ahead and press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac in order to undo that if you were working along. We need to target the layer is what we need to do. So go ahead and click on the circular meatball for the Reflection 2 layer in order to make sure it's targeted. And then go up to the transparency panel, go to its flyout menu, and choose the Make Opacity Mask command. And then you're going to get a nice empty opacity mask, albeit not what we're really looking for at all, because I don't want to hide everything immediately. And this is one of the differences between Illustrator and Photoshop. I was telling you in the previous exercise that Illustrator's opacity mask feature is analogous to Photoshop's layer mask feature, but when you create a new layer mask inside of Photoshop, it's white so that you're seeing everything. In Illustrator, it's black so that you're not seeing anything, which I think is totally crazy. But you can reverse that behavior by turning off the clip checkbox. And then you get a white opacity mask so that you can see the contents of your layer, which after all is helpful if you're trying to mask the contents of that layer. The other checkbox right here, by the way, just inverts the behavior of the mask so that instead of black creating a hole and white creating a reveal, as you'll see, white creates a hole and black creates a reveal, which is altogether nutty in my opinion, so I don't recommend you turn on this checkbox. In fact, most of the time when I'm using this feature, I keep both checkboxes off. There are times, however, where you want most things to be masked away, in which case turn clip on and then add a bunch of white objects to the mask in order to reveal the contents of the layer. Anyway, we're taking the opposite approach. Here we go. Notice that Reflection 2 now has a dashed underline, which indicates that we have an opacity mask assigned. How in the world do we get to the opacity mask? Well, you click on that opacity mask thumbnail there inside the transparency panel in order to switch so that you're modifying the mask and not the contents of the illustration. Immediately, you'll see this fairly disturbing item, which is that your layers panel all of a sudden goes empty. Every single one of your layers leaves, and you're left with this one layer that says opacity mask. But you also have this indicator that that's what's happening because the name of the layers panel actually changes as well to layers with opacity mask in parentheses. So that tells you that you're modifying the opacity mask. You make your changes, and we'll investigate those changes that we're going to make in the next exercise. But once you're done, you go ahead and click on the left-hand thumbnail in order to exit the opacity mask and return to your illustration. And that's the basics of what's going on with an opacity mask. It'll make more sense when we add some paths to that opacity mask in the next exercise.